Hello there, good morning, kia ora. Welcome to this episode of Headlines Unspun, where each week we take three episodes, or three headlines, not episodes. You can tell I'm recording this early in the morning and haven't had my coffee yet, but we take three headlines from New Zealand media and we pull them apart a little bit because headlines have a lot of power. 90% of all opinions about what's going on or what's in an article are formed on the headlines alone. So it becomes one of those things that are a surprisingly powerful tool for our media to be able to use to shape narrative and to change the way that people view about things. So let's jump into our three headlines this week. The first one is from Stuff on January 29th. It says, EB Games to restructure, proposed to lay off all of NZ, which sounds really dramatic, shutting down an entire chain of gaming stores, which are much more collectible stores. I was actually in one yesterday. I couldn't even find the PlayStation 5 games or 4 games. It was very weird, very much focusing on collectibles, which I can't complain about. But the actual proposal here is to lay off all of the back office admin staff and run all of that process out of Australia. As the physical gaming market shrinks, which has long been that bread and butter for EB Games, this type of retail outlet has been evolving to change and stay relevant. After all, the majority of people these days get their games by downloading them directly from somewhere like the PlayStation Store, for example. For EB Games, it's a shift in focus, though, to niche collectibles, which doesn't rely so heavily on local market needs and trends. Now, pop culture trends, they tend to be worldwide with slight regional differences, like how Doctor Who, for example, is really popular in the Anglosphere, as it were, those countries that are part of the Commonwealth that were colonized by the British. Doctor Who has a bigger fan base there than it does in somewhere like the United States. And for EB Games, well, it's an Australian-based company, and it feels that removing New Zealand-based back-office staff so they can save money will streamline their operations. But they're not yet considering closing all of their New Zealand operations, which is what the headline itself says, or at least implies. The second headline comes from the New Zealand Herald. Oh, this will be fun. It's actually an article written by Fran Sullivan on January the 11th. Should Donald Trump buy NZ and make Aotearoa great again? Look, Fran is known for being a particularly right-wing commentator in her views, and she often finds ways to justify government decisions. But asking about Trump buying the country, that's a really strange new angle. I mean, this actually came off the back of conversations that were happening at the time about renaming the Gulf of Mexico, which Trump put out as executive order. And yeah, Americans think it's been renamed. Everybody else thinks that Americans are idiots for trying to rename something like that. All the conversations that were going on around buying Greenland for some reason. Both of these are controversial topics that have seen significant pushback, both within the United States and outside of it. But this whole headline asks a really strange rhetorical question that kind of makes no sense, because as far as the President of the United States is concerned, the current one, New Zealand is a third world country and has no strategic value at the moment. So there's nothing really going on there. And to buy the country and turn it into another version of America, we don't need that. We've got our own politicians who keep trying to do that. You can usually tell when they're standing up on a stage, they talk about woke and how bad that kind of thing is and getting rid of DEI and a whole bunch of other imported American cultural war terms. So we don't need to try too hard. There's already people here trying to turn this country into a mini America. We don't need to sell it to Donald Trump. Not that he'd have the money to buy it anyway. The final headline for this week comes from Stuff on February the 13th, which is an interesting one because it's not oddly critical of a politician from me. It says here, we pay more for staples than Australia and the UK, and that needs to change. Now, when I first saw this, and I know I'm not the only one who did this, I thought that they were talking about like little metal clips that you use to hold paper together. It goes clink, clink, clink. I don't have my stapler here to make a staple noise, but you know what I mean, staples. But this is actually a story about Nicola Willis and how, according to her, at our supermarkets, we pay more for staple food items like eggs and rice and potatoes than our Australian or United Kingdom counterparts. And she's not wrong, we do pay a lot for these things, but the headline is framed really clumsily, so it sounds like we as a country pay more for those little metal clips. And that That's just a really weird kind of angle. The framing itself also takes on the perspective of Willis. It's very specific, a talking point to her specifically. And while it might be accurate, the headline also specifically tells us her belief that this needs to change. But it doesn't use quote marks. It doesn't imply or indicate who it is that they're taking these comments from. So it states it like it's fact. It's an unmitigated platforming of Willis's talking points. And again, she's not wrong that we pay more, and she's not wrong to say that we would like to see these things change. But to platform somebody's stance like that without pointing out that it's somebody's stance is a little bit as a moment. And the whole confusion thing on this could have been avoided by doing a couple of different things. They could have put in the word items. So it's we pay more for staple items than Australia and the UK. Or they could have pointed out we pay more for staples, or should be, quote, we pay more for staples than Australia and the UK, and that needs to change, end quote, Willis. That kind of context would change this from being a puff piece about Nicola Willis that people weren't expecting to knowing full well what it was, who was involved, and why they were saying it. But they didn't. Instead, they just said, we pay more for staples. And people sat there scratching their head wondering, do we really? I've never really considered how much we pay for little metal clips. Anyway, those are this week's headlines. Don't forget to make sure you like, share, subscribe, follow, whatever it is that you're supposed to do on whatever platform it is that you're listening to this on. And until next week, live long, prosper, be one with the force, and I will catch you guys all later.